to hide behind its heavy military equipment. Can you develop that idea a little bit more? I mean, do you mean that Gaddafi forces are seeking out urban or highly populated areas to put their or places like mosques or hospitals to put their equipment in, or have there been instances of Gaddafi forces kidnapping or forcing people to congregate around areas, or forcefully keeping people around areas where they want to hide equipment? That's one thing. And the other question, just to follow up on my colleague's questions regarding the military stalemate, I appreciate that there is no sense of a political stalemate in Libya right now, but there's a clear sense that in the military sense that neither side is making any advances for the past quite a few days, and I think that's what General Ham was referring to. Would you agree that there's a sort of a military impasse or a military balance right now in Libya between Gaddafi forces and the rebels?
Thank you. I'm not sure I got the whole of your question. I couldn't hear the opening, but I think you asked the first question is, do you mean that pro-regime Gaddafi forces are using urban areas or highly populated areas to put their vehicles amongst? And are we seeing any incidents of them taking civilians to congregate in certain areas? And then your second question was on this again, this military stalemate, is it an impasse, and do I agree? If I go to the first question, I can tell you that as we look across Libya and we look for where the forces are and where they're moving, we've been watching some of the areas to the south, well to the south of Brega and Ajdabiya. And we've seen an example of a force that we've been tracking lay up for overnight and a couple of days and actually put large, heavy vehicles and armoured vehicles amongst civilian conurbations. In other words, in amongst civilian population areas and buildings. And we can see that from our imagery in that respect. So yes, we have seen that. As we track the forces across the country, we look to see where they go. And of course, that's a direct result of our action in the past to make sure that they can't move quickly up to threaten the population areas. So we are seeing that on our imagery. As to incidents of inviting people to congregate, I personally have seen what you have seen on the news media, in the websites, all the way along. As to whether we're seeing it here, there have been reports of civilians in Misrata and that nature. But I think you're seeing as much on the news and the international media, because this is being reported by journalists and TV crews in that respect. As to the stalemate, I think it's up for anyone who wants to make a judgment in that respect. What I can say is that over the last 48 hours and probably longer, the situation between Brega and Ajdabiya, and certainly in the last 48 hours, has been fluid between Brega and Ajdabiya, and the forces have moved up and down that highway, as I outlined about the incident yesterday with the TNC tanks. If someone wants to define that as a stalemate, that's fine. All I'm saying is, yes, it's fluid, but it's fluid in a reasonably small area. Thank you. Is there another question?
BBC.
Matt Cole, BBC. Rear Admiral, you say you won't be apologising for the strikes that hit rebel targets, and you say it's not for you to make efforts to improve communication with the rebel command. Does that mean, in a sense, you're keeping an impartial distance, which actually could see you attack rebels at a later date if you see them as threatening civilian targets? And if I can also ask, in terms of the difficulties you're finding on the ground, human shields, the difficulty between distinguishing between rebels and Gaddafi forces, do you see any way of resolving this without ground troops going in? Thank you.
I think I'll go back to my standard routine. I'm going to take the last question first. The mandate and the direction that we're operating here, and that General Bouchard is operating under, and the staff here, is such that there is to be no occupation force, as stated in the UNSCR. In other words, we translate that as no boots on the ground. If there is to be a debate about that, it's a debate that the international community need to have, and then, as I would expect, that NATO needs to have in that area. In your question about attacking civilian targets, and I think what you were implying is, if the anti-Gaddafi forces were threatening or attacking civilians, bona fide civilians, would that action fall under, for us, an attack as much as the pro-regime forces are attacking civilians at the moment? And the answer has to be yes. The UNSCR and the NATO mandate is very clear. It is to protect civilians who are threatened by violence or are being attacked, and civilian population centres. And let's be clear, I'm talking about civilians. Does that answer your question?
I see Matt is nodding. Japanese media?
Fukushima from Mainichi newspaper, Japanese daily newspaper. European Union recently decided to dispatch military vessels in order to assist humanitarian assistance activities near Libya. And there might be a final decision in the coming days upon the request from the UN OCHA. Do you have any concern of the in the terms of the coordination between the NATO operation and the EU humanitarian assistance operation? Thank you very much.
Your question is, do we have any concerns? No. It has to be done properly. It has to be done correctly. There's an easy way of doing it, which is if everyone speaks to each other, if, just as we're doing at the moment, the international humanitarian agencies are speaking to NATO, telling us where they have vessels, telling us where they're going to leave from, where they want them to go. That information goes straight. If we take the sea blockade, that information goes straight to the Maritime Component Headquarters, Admiral Verry's headquarters here in Naples, and then straight out to the ships at sea. So if you know where they're coming from and you know where they're going, as I said in the statement, we'll take every action to do that. The other one I can give an example of is the aid flights, and I myself watched the C-17 being unloaded in Doha some days ago. That aircraft had gone into Libya, taken out casualties, and then gone back, and as I recall, went back the next day. And there's a process that goes through where those aircraft are notified to us. It goes to the air component commander to make sure that the aircraft that are flying, the airborne early warning aircraft, the AWACS knows where they are, and the fighters that are up there as well. There are corridors that we can do this. So if you take that all the way back, let's say to this potential for the EU to do something different, then all we have to do is to speak to each other. But at the end of the day, what we have to make sure is that the arms embargo isn't breached, the no-fly zone isn't breached, and we continue to protect the civilian population. Thank you.
In terms of the humanitarian mission, as you know, NATO has completed its plans for a humanitarian mission and stands ready, if requested, to put that mission in place. At the moment, we are making sure, as the Rear Admiral said, that we are deconflicting, as the term goes here, making sure that there is no conflict, no confusion between our operations to enforce the arms embargo and humanitarian operations ongoing for the people of Libya. And also in terms of our regular contact with the European Union, that is ongoing, that is clear, that is transparent. I can tell you that the Secretary General will be meeting the European Union High Representative, Baroness Cathy Ashton, next Monday, and we have also invited Baroness Ashton to the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting next week in Berlin to discuss the situation in Libya. Any other questions? Herald Tribune.
Stephen Castle from the International Herald Tribune. Just going back to the incident in Braga, I'm a little bit confused about the reason that you don't want to apologise for this. Is it because you, I mean, as I understood it, you mistook these tanks for Gaddafi tanks because you didn't know that the rebels were operating them? And if that's the case, it was a mistake, and therefore, you know, why not apologise? And the alternative is that perhaps you thought that whoever was operating them, they were attacking civilian targets, and they were a threat to them. And if it's the latter, then you know, that puts the rebel activities in quite a different light. So which of those two is it?
I'm sorry. Can you just let's be clear about the question? Just repeat the specific question, please. I've got your points about, you know, was it a mistake, you mistook, and you didn't, and/or you didn't know.
If it was a mistake, then why not apologise? If it wasn't a mistake, then what we can conclude is that those tanks were actually targeting or a threat to civilian population, in which case I would understand the reason that you wouldn't want to apologize for that.
Thank you. I think I'd make 2 points. One, in this situation in Libya, we have direct evidence, documentary evidence of tanks attacking civilians, shots from journalists themselves, with people around them, and you know as much as what has gone on in Misrata as I suspect I do. So in that point, tanks have been used, even though we've seen the tactics change over the course of this week, where the tanks have been held further back. We've seen light technical vehicles with big guns, machine guns, anti-aircraft guns on the back of pickups used. We've seen groups of 3 or 4 of those trucks used to fit into the civilian population and then try and move forward as quickly as they can. The one thing about those trucks, though, is that they cannot hold ground. They can directly target the civilian population. But when you then see tanks coming up and appearing on the highways in the roads up to Brega and then between Brega and Ashdabia, those are the vehicles that cause the greatest harm to the civilians. And that's the first point I would make. The second point is that up to that point, we had not seen the TNC operating tanks. And as I said earlier, and I'm not apologising for what I said, it is and was a very fluid situation on the road between Brega and Ashdabia. In other words, there were vehicles going backwards and forwards. But the key point was those units that we had previously seen in Misrata and other areas attacking civilians were on that road. And that's where I think we got to yesterday.
Rear Admiral, thank you very much. I know you're a very busy man. We'll let you go back to the mission unless there are any further questions from Naples.
Ladies and gentlemen, any questions? No, I don't think there are any more questions from here. Thank you, Juana.